Afternoon, Rotary District 7770. Welcome to Conversations with Rotary Action People and your all-club call for Wednesday, September 23rd. I am your host, Donald Hovis from the Chicora Rotary Club in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. And today we are talking about exotics and other species, but mostly bugs. And our speaker today is Bob Wolfe. Good afternoon, Bob.
I'm glad to be here with you all.
We're glad to have you. Look forward to your presentation in the next few minutes. But up first, to bless today's meeting, Mr. Paul Walter.
Join me in prayer. May those assembled here today enjoy the many offerings of Rotary. May we abide by the rules we've established, those of trust, fellowship, and ethics. And may we place service above self in our daily endeavors. And may we always test ourselves in our efforts to be sure that they are the truth, good for all concerned, of benefit to mankind, and provide peace and understanding. Amen.
Thank you, Paul. And now to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, Sandy Brooks.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America
and to the republic for which it stands, one nation,
under God,
indivisible,
with liberty
and justice
for all.
Thank you. Now, to introduce your CWRAP team, our Public Image Chair from the 5 Points Rotary Club in Columbia, Miss Mary Gask. Thank you, Mary. And our District Communications Officer from the Summerville Evening Rotary Club in Summerville, South Carolina, Mr. Terry Moore. Thank you, Terry. Now, I will say several of you have already introduced yourself in the chat box, but remember, there is always a question of the day, so don't jump ahead. Don't jump ahead, because you're going to need to reintroduce yourself with the question of the day. So in the chat box, we want to see your name, your Rotary Club, and this question. Please don't Google it. You shouldn't really probably have to Google this, but we're in the month of September. So September in Old England was called what? We'll reveal the answer at the end of the call, but we'll now turn it over to Bob. Bob, I know you're going to be sharing your screen. And I have some questions for you.
Okay. Let me open that and go to full screen here. See if that works. There we go. How's that?
I can see it.
Okay, sounds good then. So do you want me just to go ahead and jump in then?
Yeah, I will say, just real quick, let's let everyone answer that question. And then if nobody gets it, I'll call on David Terrard. But David Terrard can't put it in the chat box first.
Okay.
All right, Bob, take it away.
Okay, well, I'm pleased to be here both as a Rotary member and as a biologist and as a person of faith too, because we need to look at a lot of these issues that are affecting our world. And certainly this question of exotic and invasive species is one that has become problematic. I'm going to go ahead and begin with one spider here at the beginning, particularly for Mary. But basically, first of all, we should ask the question, what is an exotic or invasive species? First of all, the term exotic really means it comes from somewhere else. Introduced basically means it's brought in some means, and we tend to use that particularly with agricultural products and pests. The term alien, again, is a term we use, and again, it's basically similar to exotic. The question of non-indigenous means it doesn't belong at that location. It actually is from another location, or we often use the term non-native for these kinds of situations. And then I put up at the top right there the word invasive. Invasive we tend to use biologically as a little bit more severe. It's not just moving in and having a place locally, but it's actually causing troubles or overtaking enough that it's causing damage. So basically, all of these represent species outside their native distributional range, but they arrive due to human activity. In other words, if, say, a spider balloons from one location to a new location where it didn't belong before, never was before, we would not consider that an exotic or introduced or alien species. It has moved there naturally. But when it hitches a ride in our car and we bring it to a new location, now it has been introduced to that area. And most of these are actually deliberate or accidental, that we're going to see in the next slide, one that happened just after I presented this to the Irma Lake Murray one. I think the next day we had the report of a new species in the Midlands area. So the term invasive then, not native to that location, has a tendency to spread and cause damage, whether it's individual, medical, or economic damage to us. And I gave the example down in the bottom right here of a spider that many of you have seen pictures of. It's called the brown recluse. And the brown recluse is a native North American species. When we say that, it means it lives in parts of North America naturally. So if you go and think about Arkansas, and you think of about a 200-mile radius around Arkansas, that is where brown recluses live. Now, occasionally they get a little further out, but you might recognize right away that that means it doesn't live in South Carolina. It is not native to South Carolina. It's only been here a few times when people brought it in with their furniture, with huge packages, desks, things where this thing has been able to hide in it and move in. So we have people all over South Carolina definitely afraid of brown recluses, spending hundreds, if not thousands of dollars over their lifetime to spray poisons in their house and risk cancer for a spider that doesn't even exist in South Carolina. And I've done that down, for those of you from the Hilton Head area, I did this study that's been published a couple years ago in the Hilton Head area. And all the spiders brought into me that people swore up and down were brown recluses, not one of them was a brown recluse. And you can find that in the Journal of South Carolina Academy if you're interested in seeing the details of that study. So the problem is we've got to be careful. Now, just after I gave this talk, this is a species that made the front page of the state newspaper, the tegu lizard. This is an exotic from South America. It likes particularly open areas, grassy areas where there's a lot of space, and it eats just about anything, including all of our native species. And they found one in Lexington County here, and now they've actually found 7 more. So this species is now established in the Midlands, at least, of South Carolina, and we might find it elsewhere. By the way, it is established in Florida and South Georgia as well. So this was brought in probably by people who liked it as a pet. Then it got too big and too nasty for them to handle, so they released it, and now we have a breeding population here in the Midlands. Problematic. It could drastically change the way that our environments look here, the types of animals that are present. So a couple examples besides that one. First of all, kudzu. If you're from the upstate, you know kudzu. It's even here in the Midlands. Basically, it grows over and smothers all native trees and everything that lives in that area. Essentially destroys the environment except for kudzu. Feral pigs are a huge problem in many areas, including some things we don't think of as pigs, but our national park here in the Midlands is overrun with these pigs, and they cause tremendous damage to the soil and to the plants. They basically dig things up and damage the trees constantly. Earthworms. Heard a lot about those lately on Next Door Neighbor website. Everybody's afraid of something else that eats the earthworms, and they think the earthworms are so wonderful, but basically the earthworms have destroyed our topsoil throughout much of the country. And actually, when I studied them in Minnesota, I found they'd gone through and taken a beautiful, deep, rich soil up there, maple forest, and made it look like it had had fire go through it, completely changed everything. And I was there for a Native American tribe, which was losing all of its medicinal plants because of the earthworms and their destruction. For those of you that like the marine environment, lionfish. They are out there now in just offshore from South Carolina. And again, these are exotics. They're from the Pacific Ocean, and they're causing tremendous harm to our fisheries. How about pythons and iguanas? You've all heard the stories of dogs and cats being eaten, and even little children maybe being eaten. But the pythons are huge, and they've definitely, again, decimated our national park, the Everglades, by all their damage. And so we're seeing them constantly being a problem. European starling basically has spread disease throughout North America because of its huge numbers and its propensity to like to live in city parks and poop all over the parks, which leaves fungus which infect humans. Hydrilla has caused huge problems in aquatic ecosystems. Asian clams, zebra mussels. Some of you might be familiar with these because they basically, again, have affected our rivers and streams. And the Asian clam has actually caused huge problems in the Great Lakes, where they've had to take the outflow of hot water from the huge nuclear plants, and they have to shut down the nuclear plants for periods of time to be able to basically go in and scrape out all the mussels. And of course, people have to keep their boats out of the water because these will go up into the water intakes and live there and change, again, the environment. So huge economic and ecological problems going on. And wisteria, purple loosestrife, again, would be good examples in this area. A lot of effort by environmentalists are trying to say affect and keep purple loosestrife out of the environments in South Carolina. Another good example, we can look at agricultural situations that happen, and there are thousands of situations and species that have come in. This one is just one that I picked partly because I'm a little more familiar with it and with the state entomologist who actually studies beetles and trees. And the emerald ash borer is transported in firewood. So a lot of people are not aware, but you cannot bring firewood out of South Carolina to North Carolina, or you can't bring it out of North Carolina to here or Georgia to here. It's actually a violation of the law, and you get a fairly large fine for doing that because the emerald ash borer is often in the wood that we transport around, and firewood seems to be one of our major problems that people do. But it was introduced only in 2002, and it's already cost over $1 billion in damage and to control it. And that does not include monitoring issues and all these other problems associated. And it's killed hundreds of millions of ash trees throughout eastern North America, but that particularly includes the upstate of North Carolina, and they are particularly concerned with that, as we are in the upstate of South Carolina. And by the way, I don't mind being interrupted, so if you have questions, let me know. I'm going to go fast so we have time at the end, if not. A few other problems caused by invasive species. How about damage to buildings? The Formosan termite is considered one of the superorganisms that can cause all kinds of problems, because this termite doesn't just like to live in the soil and then build a tube up to wood to infect it. It can actually move into your attic and start eating it from the top down. And this one has now hit Charleston area quite a bit. The worst place in the United States for this actually is New Orleans, where there's a lot of dampness, and they've had huge problems in that. Even the insect zoo run by Audubon Society there in New Orleans has had to move out of their building, and they're going to be shut down for a couple of years, move them to the aquarium because of termites in that building. And yet one of the people who runs the insect zoo there has been one of the people studying this and helping to try to deal with it. I might also mention, by the way, notice that the cost for control and repair is about $2 billion a year already in the United States for this. And this has been a huge problem. For example, my brother who lives in the upstate was a missionary in Papua New Guinea, and basically they had to build their house because he was on a small island in the Coral Sea on high stilts, and this thing moved in and basically destroyed his house within a month. And so he had to completely rebuild his home over there. Another one that is a problem for us, of course, are the invasive species of mosquitoes. And we have many of them and ticks going on in this country. And the one I'm showing you is often called the Asian tiger mosquito, but we also have the yellow fever mosquito, which comes from Africa and looks quite a bit alike. And many of you might remember decades ago in South Carolina, you generally were not bitten by mosquitoes during the daytime. Mosquitoes generally were not seen. But this one is a day flyer, likes to be out, and it's very irritating, causes a lot of problems. And if you notice down on the bottom there, it can carry dengue, which is a problem in the United States and certainly throughout the Mediterranean, Zika, which cost us a lot of problems a few years ago, and it's still a huge problem in Central and South America. West Nile virus, which is a big issue still in South Carolina, and again, headquartered around the West Ashley area in Charleston. Eastern equine encephalitis, which is all over the horse countries of the Midlands and different areas like that. And this year has been particularly bad. And because it's 90% fatal, it really is a problem when it gets into humans. And this has been one of the worst years we've had, even though the case numbers still are low. But to me, from my faith background, I don't like to see anybody lost to this encephalitis, which destroys the brain. And again, the cost is already in the many millions. We don't even have good estimates of it, partly because the people studying this mosquito or working with it, trying to control it, are also working with other types of insects as well. So again, this is another example here. This one is actually similar to kudzu. This is actually Lygodum further south. And so even though kudzu tends to like the upstate and mountain areas well, Lygodum is much more common down in, say, Florida and the low country areas. And again, it covers and destroys all of the native vegetation. Problems caused by invasive species. This is another one here, the idea of nuisance species. And I'm going to put it that way, partly because in many cases, they don't really cause much problem or damage. Good example might be cockroaches. Oops, just touched my keyboard, it's very sensitive. Cockroaches are a good example. We tend to think of them as very problematic insects. The problem is cockroaches and humans are like twins. They're always together. Wherever a human goes, there are cockroaches that go with them. And we have about 8 species of very common cockroaches that have all come with humans into this country. And of course, we have dozens of species that live here already. But cockroaches rarely cause problems for us. They just simply are a nuisance because we have to keep our food items closed up tightly. If we leave food and scraps and things behind our counters out, then the cockroaches will flourish. And so they will basically be a pest species because of that. Now, can they carry bacteria? Yes. So if they're living behind your kitchen sink and there's something that fell back there that had salmonella on it, they can have it on their legs. And when they crawl on new food that you have sitting out and you leave out for many hours, the salmonella could possibly grow, even though, again, the chances for getting infected are fairly low. But cockroaches, we certainly consider a nuisance, and we spend a huge fortune trying to eradicate them. And the bigger problem is that most cockroaches now have been sprayed so many times over the years that in some cases they're finding that in some areas 100% of the pest cockroaches are resistant to our pesticides. And that means basically we're spraying ourselves and poisoning ourselves and our children rather than actually doing much harm to the cockroaches. They have adapted quite well to the sprays. We haven't. We get cancer. We get polycystic ovarian syndrome. We get even autism has been linked to the pesticides we spray. So a lot of problems from our spraying, to me, more of a problem from that than from other things. Weeds, again, they're a nuisance, aren't they? Some people don't like them in their lawn. For me, I like weeds in my lawn because it actually makes it greener and sometimes gives me flowers. And the other great thing is the more types of plants you have in your lawn, the healthier it is because it has more types of bacteria. And when you go outside, it actually helps you get the good bacteria that keep your microbiome strong and make you healthier. And so weeds are probably our friends rather than our enemies, except occasionally when they try to take over. And that's when we get into problems. Marmorated stink bugs, we've seen huge numbers now come in and create problems. Roly-polies, a lot of you consider very nuisance forms, but very few people are afraid of the, we call them sow bugs. And then another example here at the bottom, the brown widow. And let me just say this, in South Carolina, we have one spider species called the black widow that we need to watch out for. I don't recommend you grab them and squeeze them because if you hurt them, they're going to bite. And they do have a toxin that is a neurotoxin, which affects our brain, our spinal cord, and our muscles, causing tightness. Very, very, very rarely do they ever cause death. But we have at least one reported bite a year in South Carolina, and generally a day or two in the hospital for muscle relaxants takes care of the problem. The brown widow, though, is a species which was first detected in the United States in 1932 in south of Miami in Homestead. Then when Hurricane Andrew hit in, I think, 1984, the military National Guard moved all their equipment up to Jacksonville, and they brought the brown widow up there. And the brown widow made it to Hilton Head area. I found them in Bluffton myself in 2000, 2001. Charleston had them in 2003. And 2005, I found one example in Columbia. Now we have probably one of the more common species around our homes is now the brown widow. And the brown widow, you might notice, by the way, can be very dark chocolate brown, hard to separate from the black widow, or it can be like the one in the picture here, it can be fairly light colored. But the hourglass, instead of being strictly red, is more of a Clemson orange. So Clemson fans can all rejoice. It's got a nice Clemson orange color to warn you to stay away. So again, don't grab them, but they've not been associated with any bites ever in the United States. One way you can often detect them, by the way, if you notice to the left of the names, their egg sac is very, very distinctive. When you look at their egg sac, which you'll find, especially if you're going to open up and look at your water meters, your water controls, you'll see them down there, and they have this very spiky egg case. And so if you find that, you know that you have them. And if people find them in areas outside of Columbia or the Low Country, I'm looking for specimens to document how far they've gone in the state. We don't know yet. Medical issues. Obviously, the mosquitoes carrying disease is a big problem, but we also find that these invasive species have other issues that they can present. Number one is fire ants. Most of us think of them as a nuisance because of their biting, but their biting, of course, does cause problems because they do inject a little bit of poison in us, so they cause irritation. They also bite at the same time they sting. They actually bite, and then they use that leverage to sting at the same time. And many people get small infections at the site. Many people, they just get these small pimple-like looks on their skin where they have been bitten and stung, representing the bacterial infection that has come in with it. But the bigger problem is that fire ants are actually the leading cause of anaphylactic reactions in South Carolina. We often think of honeybees, we're afraid of that. We're afraid of peanut butter. We're afraid of so many things, and yet fire ants are the number one problem. And part of it is everybody has been bitten by fire ants. And most people don't even pay attention to it anymore and let them survive. I'm one of those that still go out and put the broadcast food out for them, food poison out for them, and let them bring it back and poison their own colony and try to control them that way. But fire ants are a huge problem for us economically as well. They cause a lot of damage. Killer bees. This one has not hit South Carolina yet. We've had deaths in Florida because they do get in, though they've been very good at stopping the colonies as soon as they're detected. They are established in southern Texas and southern Arizona, southern New Mexico, and southern California. So if you travel to those areas, you want to remember, number one thing, if you see a bee, never slap it. If it's a killer bee and you slap the bee, you are going to be dead. Very simple answer. Because they send out a pheromone into the air and all of them will attack you. Normal European honeybees that we have don't have that kind of reaction and basically don't like to sting. And so it's very rare actually for people to be stung by a honeybee, though people will sting themselves by hitting them when they're sitting on, when they land on them. But people in the United States are kind of funny. We wear bright color, yellow, orange, red things, which are attracting to bees because we look like a flower. And then we also wear perfumes and underarm deodorant and all these things with floral scents in them. And the bees come to check us out. And then we get upset that they came to see us. They don't want to hurt us. So don't really worry. And of course, several of you might be aware of the stories of the murder hornets coming out of the state of Washington and British Columbia. They did find just a couple. They hoped they weren't established, but this summer they did document that there actually is a colony somewhere there, and they're trying to find out where it is because these murder hornets have a nasty, strong sting. They won't always kill you, but let's just say it's very painful and something you don't want. Next example down, the Asian longhorn tick. This is a problem one because it is now probably in South Carolina, though I haven't gotten any records myself yet, so it's not documented. But this one can cause massive losses to wildlife, to domestic animals, and it's also been found already in the United States to carry disease, and it's only been here since 2017. So a lot of problems already. Then we get into a couple questions. Is SARS an invasive species? We'll let that one stand for now because we're not sure. Same thing, Zika. These have come from other locations. Zika has come from a small cave in Uganda in Africa before it spread out through Africa and Asia. Then a new form of it actually invaded Americas where we saw severe problems. SARS-CoV-2 probably came from a bat. In spite of some of the stories you hear, the evidence seems to be overwhelming that way. And it has now passed, once it can move person to person, has moved around the world. I will go ahead, since time is running out here, to finish with this story, and that is on the giant hogweed. This hogweed, I should say, this is a species that was brought in as an ornamental. You can see how very tall it is. So it's kind of an interesting ornamental if you have large fields. And people started growing it. It looks a lot like some other plants that are shorter. But the problem is it's taken over in many locations. So we consider it a noxious weed. But even more problematic is the fact that if you touch this plant, you can actually get painful burns from the chemicals on it. These burns can be so severe they can cause scarring. And if people accidentally have touched the plant and touched their eyes, it can actually cause blindness by the damage to the cornea that results. And this is expected to be in South Carolina, but as far as I know, it's not been reported yet, but it is in North Carolina, so we're expecting it to continue to move south. And so these are the kinds of stories that we constantly find, that things are constantly moving around. A good example of that in the Midlands is the beautiful golden silk spider, very common down in the Charleston, Bluffton, Beaufort area, but it only was occasionally found in the Midlands, and now it is one of the most common spiders out here locally. I was at a church yesterday for my 13-year-old soccer. It was all over the grounds there. It was all over Saluda Shoals Park. It is one of the most common fall things, but it's a huge spider. It's as big as my little finger, and it makes huge webs that are beautiful because the silk is golden, and they're wonderful to see. They're great pest controllers, but that one I don't consider an invasive. That's one where we're just seeing a range extension occur. We were part of it, but now we're firmly in it every year for the past few years. So let me go ahead. Any questions? And I don't see.
I'll ask those of you, Bob. Don't worry about looking at the chat. I'll take care of it for you. One that came in while you were talking was, what does it mean to be established? How many of a species need to be in an area to be considered established?
Well, you'll find there's quite a bit of argument about that question. The biggest thing that we'll generally use in the conservation biology world, environmental world, is if it is in an area and it's breeding. So in other words, we have a population and the population is breeding. So in other words, we need more than one female laying eggs or releasing young. We need actually a number of them in an area to say they are established. So once we see reproduction, that's normally a clue that it is either established or it is moving toward establishment.
All right, and then next is just a comment, and then I got a couple questions for you after
Please.
that. New nuisance weed is called the chamber bitter, I guess. Looks like a dwarf mimosa, spreads very rapidly and difficult to control.
Yeah, I'm not real familiar with that one. What was the name you said for it?
Chamber, is it chamber biter or chamber bitter? It looks like it's spelled bitter.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with that one. That sounds like one of the many trees. Of course, we bring a lot of exotic tree species in to grow them. So technically, even the apple is an exotic species in South Carolina. But some of the bigger problems are bringing in some of the fast-growing things. Acacia plants out of Australia are a huge problem in many, many parts of the world. Acacias tend to like to take over and really cause damage. Even some of the very thick bamboo trees can really take over tremendously. In South Carolina, it was interesting this morning, our upcoming district director, I'm going to forget the name now, he was on with our club, was talking about just having planted some longleaf pines. Longleaf are the native. Oh, there you are, Paul. I see you on the bottom now. Enjoyed your talk. But the longleaf are native, so I was very glad to hear you say you were doing the longleaf rather than the slash pines, which have kind of taken over a lot of our environment, and they're not conducive to a lot of our native species, such as the woodpeckers, which need the longleaf to breed in.
Yeah, and Paul is our district governor-elect.
District governor-elect. Okay, I'll get it straight. I'm a fairly new member.
That's all right. We're glad to have you in Rotary. So 2 questions for you to wind down here before we go to that question of the day about September is, why don't we have stronger laws and regulations to prevent invasive species and the damage and huge cost?
Well, a few states do have tougher laws than we do, particularly California and Florida. The damage, the economic damage in Florida is considered to be about $50 billion a year. Did you hear that? $50 billion a year for the state, the federal government, and homeowners to control these exotic species. But part of it is our unwillingness to give up our pretty plants and something new that's coming along, and certainly our pets. This is where a lot of the problem is. And also, we just don't like to spend money to check products coming in for the things that they have in them. I'm working on several exotic invasive spider species now besides the brown widow. And for the most part, people just completely ignore what's happening. And part of it is our dislike for regulation, things like that. And yet it costs us a lot of problems and a lot of lives in our country And to me, those are important, and the environment certainly is important.
And my last question for you, Bob, is why do people release exotic species after they have them as pets?
Well, part of that is because it was our pet, and so we are afraid to do what is necessary, which is the humane killing, and or find someone that can take it from us. And it's not pleasant to ever have to put any animal down for those of us that love animals, and I'm a zoologist in my training, but it is sometimes necessary because when we bring them to an area they don't belong, the potential to harm them is great, but even greater is that harm to the environment and to other exotic things. It's like the questions of cats. Cats, we believe, are so wonderful, and yet they're out there killing hundreds of millions of beautiful songbirds every year. And we don't like to think about that because we think we're being ethical by protecting cats and taking care of them. So part of it is our lack of understanding of what ethics are and what's important, and doing the right thing for everyone, including the environment.
And then we had one more little question submitted in the chat boxes. Are wolf spiders dangerous?
Wolf spiders, no, they're not dangerous at all. It's a very interesting thing. I've actually did my master's degree on wolf spiders. And South Carolina also, by the way, is a very unique state. We are the only state in the country that has an official state spider. That happens to be the Carolina wolf spider, which is a rather large spider. The body can be about that long. And it's really a wonderful spider to have because they can actually catch the bigger cockroaches out in your yard. I know several people that have been bitten. One actually is a high school student locally who actually was doing a project with me and decided to get careless. He was bitten, and the complete remnants of his bite disappeared within a week. No problems, no toxicity, no infection, no issues at all. And then a local state trooper who I'm a friend with was bitten by one when he grabbed something and didn't realize when he's cleaning out the drain of his, the corner of his swimming pool, reached in to take the stuff out of the trap there, and the spider had been on top and bit him. And again, within 2 days, the bite was gone in this case, and no effect at all. And these were larger spiders. So again, wolf spiders have absolutely no problem. Yes, they can hurt, but that's about the worst of it.
Well, great presentation, Bob. Appreciate you joining us today.
You're very welcome.
And even better, it's glad to see you're in Rotary, involved in our wonderful district. So thank you very much for your time, sir.
You're very welcome. I hope you all have a wonderful day and be safe out there.
Thank you. Now, for the question of the day, no one submitted an answer or a right answer in the chat box. So if Mr. David Terrard can come off of mute, I'm sure he knows the answer. If not, I'll tell you what the answer is. So, David? Oh, still on mute. All right. How are you, sir?
I'm well, but I haven't a clue.
Oh, my goodness. Okay.
You don't know everything, you know.
So September, and I'm looking here to read it off to you so I make sure I say this correctly. But it's very easy. It will make total sense as soon as I say it. You're like, oh, really? Okay, September in Old England was called Harvest Month or Harvest Month, meaning this is the time to gather up the rest of the harvest and prepare for the winter months. So see, the reason for the question of the day is, and I'll give you a hint for about a month from now, is for Halloween on Friday, October 30th, our CWRAP is all trivia related to Halloween. We want you to come dressed in your costume because we will have prizes for the best costume. And then we'll also have prizes for if you get some trivia questions right. So we will have a question of the day, something in current events or in that area of realm going forward in the CWRAP calls. Speaking of CWRAP, thank you for joining us today. We're back again on Friday at 11 o'clock with Dr. Harmon from the American Medical Association. I guarantee that's going to be a very important topic. So we want to see you back at 11 o'clock on Friday. I will conclude today. And Bob, if you're still on the line, and Pauline, if you guys could stay after we say the end here in just a few minutes, if possible.
Sir.
All right. I'll conclude with the 4-way test. Of the things we think, say, or do, is it the truth? Is it fair to all concerned? Will it build goodwill and better friendships? Will it be beneficial to all concerned? Have a wonderful Wednesday. Thank you for joining us for Conversations with Rotary Action People. That's a wrap. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you.